you know, there's no such thing as a profile of a school shooter.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of focus on trying to understand the so-called profile, or to simplify it to a single cause like bullying, video games, or whatever it may be. And based on my research, there's an incredible diversity among school shooters in terms of why they're doing the attack, their family backgrounds, their life histories, their personalities, how popular they are, how academically skilled they are, where they fall in terms of intellectual ability, athletic ability. You see all kinds of kids committing these attacks.
Mm.
And that's important, one, because we have to understand there's a lot of different factors that put someone on this path. It's not just any one simple thing. It's also important to recognize, because if we think we know what a school shooter looks like, and there's a warning sign from a kid who just doesn't fit our notion, it could be captain of the football team or even a popular cheerleader, because sometimes girls do these attacks too. If we think we know what a school shooter looks like, we could minimize the warning signs because we just don't take them as seriously if it's from a kid who doesn't fit our profile. There's a lot more than people tend to be aware of, because there's a stereotype that they're always white males. And they're not always male. 4 of the 48 perpetrators in my last book were female. And on my website, I think I've got at least 9 female school shooters. And they're certainly not all white. And it seems, again, it gets a little complicated. It seems through 60s, 70s, and 80s into the 1990s, they tended to be more white. In the last 20 or so years, it seems to be a more diverse population. But even that has to be qualified, because when you're looking at perpetrators in secondary school, they tend to be more white. But when you're looking at perpetrators at colleges and universities, they tend to be less white. So, there's a lot of data. I have an article on my website looking at 50 years of school shootings, including this kind of demographic analysis. So, again, school shooters come in all shapes and sizes. They're certainly not all white. They're not all male. There's a lot of racial, ethnic diversity, despite the sort of ongoing stereotype that they're always white males. That's simply not the case. In my research, I tend to focus on 3 different types of perpetrators. And one of those types is what I call the traumatized school shooter. Now, trauma in the family can occur at any socioeconomic level. But at this population, what we see a lot of is they're at the lower end, sometimes severe poverty, sometimes not so severe, but certainly the lower end of the economic spectrum, with parents who are alcoholic, drug addicted, there's domestic violence, there's child abuse. Some of the parents have served time in prison. So you have these, chronically violent, dysfunctional families out of which these school shooters emerge. So that's not most of the school shooters, but that is a significant portion of them who come from that background where there's role models for violence. And in fact, I track how many of these shooters had someone else in the family who engaged in the illegal use of firearms. And often it's a father, an older brother, somebody in the family has a history of criminal behavior with guns. So however we interpret that, maybe as a role model or just the genetics passing from one generation to the next, you do see that kind of pattern among a subsection of the school shooters. But when it comes to school shooters, one of the risk factors, I think, would have to be that kind of highly dysfunctional, violent background, combined with other things. And, most shooters don't come from that kind of a background. If they don't, though, they tend to either be of the psychopathic type, like I spoke of earlier with Carl Pearson, or someone who's very psychotic, like schizophrenic, with, hallucinations and delusions and so on. So you have these different typologies, but most people who are psychopathic or psychotic or come from traumatic families don't commit these attacks. So again, there's levels here. Those are things we see commonly among the school shooters, but then there's other factors, such as A lot of them are extremely frustrated in terms of dating, love, sexuality. Chronic failures, disappointment, and so on. So they may feel very hopeless and depressed about that. A lot of them have either disciplinary issues at school and or academic failures at school. So maybe other things that have them feeling hopeless, depressed, etc. Some of them get arrested in the community. So there's another setback, another blow to their sense of self or their hope for the future. Now they have a criminal record. So what I try to do to sum this up, to minimize the complexity for a moment, is it's a combination of who they are and what happens to them. You know, if you're psychopathic or psychotic or extremely traumatized, and you have failure after failure after failure and rejection, and your life's falling apart, and you're hopeless and depressed and maybe suicidal, and you're very angry because of all of this, then you're seeing a combination of factors that might put someone on this pathway.